Right, looks like we're ready to get started. Okay.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. So if I could just start an executive meeting tonight, if I could just ask the members of the executive to introduce themselves and their position. Start with Councillor Smith.
Good evening, Chair. Cabinet Member for Business, Enterprise and Job Creation.
Thank you. Councillor Hugo.
Good evening, Councillor Jane Hugo, Cabinet Member for Climate Change.
Thank you. Councillor Hunter.
Good evening, Councillor Peter Hunter, Cabinet Assistant.
Thank you. Councillor Hobson.
Councillor Jim Hobson, Cabinet Member for Children's Social Care and Schools.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
I'm Cabinet Member for Projects and Partnerships.
Thank you. Councillor Farrell.
Councillor Joe Farrell, Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care and Health.
And Councillor Campbell.
Councillor Gillian Campbell, Cabinet Member for Inclusion, Youth and Transients.
Thank you. And Councillor Benson. Thank you very much. So obviously we're all in attendance, and we have officers, public press who are joining us virtually. So if we move on to agenda item 1, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any? Nope. Thank you. Agenda item 2, which is the LGA Corporate Peer Challenge response. And Anthony, I believe, is presenting on this for us. Thank you.
Peer challenges are a key part of the LGA's offer to its members, and the recommendation is that member authorities hold a corporate peer challenge with the LGA every 5 years or so. And Blackpool Council last held one in 2014, and in what feels like a long time ago now, in March of last year, we had a return of the peer challenge process, and the LGA and their team visited us, a mixture of senior officers and members, at the beginning of March last year. They were in Blackpool for 3 or 4 days, conducting many interviews and spending much time with us, interviewing partners, members and staff. Only days after that process, we began to feel the extraordinary consequences of the COVID pandemic. And for that reason, the fact that ourselves and the rest of public service entered into an emergency response mode, the LGA did not issue their report to us until the very end, or close to the very end of last year. And it was gratefully received. And in discussion with the leader at that time, we took the view as a council that we had to continue to prioritise everything we were doing surrounding COVID and our emergency response. So we would begin to prepare a response to the peer challenge in the summer of this year. We also were very mindful that at that time we'd already started delivering upon the vast majority of recommendations that are contained in the report. I'm pleased that the LGA, as evidenced in Appendix A, can attest to the excellent relationships between officers and members, the fact that Blackpool is clearly now delivering on the vision. That was one of the things that came out of the peer challenge in 2014. And they cited the real progress that we'd already made by March last year on key areas such as children's services. In the LGA report, they framed it in terms of 10 recommendations, and as we set out in our response, we accept the vast majority of those recommendations in full. It's very much for the council to decide and determine how it wishes to take forward those recommendations, and we've set that out in our response under 5 themes of organisational transformation, partnerships, climate emergency, finance, and others. I'll say a few things about our response, which was just here for approval this evening. In terms of organisational transformation, I think we have continued to make great strides on our children's improvement agenda, and that is showcased in our response. We've also, largely as a consequence of COVID, actually delivered huge amounts of organisational transformation in a very short space of time, and we intend to give more airtime and coverage to that priority within the revised council plan that we'll be looking to bring forward early in the new year. In terms of finance, again, we accept the majority of recommendations. Actually, I think the next but one item on executive this evening is evidence of that in terms of our new medium-term financial sustainability strategy, and we have followed the recommendations in terms of being more explicit about our reserves policy. There are some matters where we've perhaps taken a slightly different view from the peer review team, particularly surrounding the amount of energy and time we put into refreshing our medium-term financial strategy every year. The view that we've taken, that Steve may wish to say a bit more about later, is that we think we should alter and amend that in line with changing circumstances rather than stick to a rigid 1-year review process. In terms of partnerships, well, our climate change action plan that's on tonight is evidence of where we want to go with that in terms of a climate change partnership. But also in the last year, we've set up a children and families partnership, which has been successful in terms of continuing the improvement agenda. And then finally, on comms, we've actioned many of the recommendations that were contained within the report that build upon the peer review to comms in 2017. And last but not least, again on the agenda tonight is evidence of how we are delivering a pace on the climate emergency. I think it was a legitimate criticism within the peer challenge report, and we have tonight as the next item that Scott will talk at, our climate change action plan. I've discussed the content of our response with colleagues at the LGA who are comfortable with the approach that we've taken, recognising that we're still in, to some extent, extraordinary times, and we're intending to work with the LGA so that the review team can return to us in next spring to review progress. So very happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. You'd answered one of the questions I was going to ask, was when they were coming back, when there was going to be a further review. They always follow up, don't they? So that'd be quite timely. Does anybody have any questions? Or... No? Okay. No, that's good. Thank you very much. So can I move the resolution to approve the Council's response to the Corporate Peer Challenge attached at Appendix 2B to the agenda, and note the actions taken already to address the recommendations made by the Peer Challenge team? Show of hands, please.
And that's carried.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony. So, agenda item 3, Blackpool Climate Action Plan, and I believe that's Scott presenting on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Is to present the Council's first Climate Change Action Plan to Executive for recommendation to Council. So this outlines the steps we're going to take to get towards net zero. We've picked it out across 10 themes, which include the major categories of emissions, which are housing, business and transport. The report is clear that we can achieve net zero as an organisation by 2030, and we will include further specific actions on that as and when data and actions become available from some reports that we're gathering at the moment. The town can achieve a 68% reduction in its emissions by 2030 if central government makes sufficient resources available. The action plan itself is a blend of science from some reports we've commissioned and public views from our climate assembly, which was held online earlier this year. We've also taken into account the comments received back from the consultation, but there's some further ideas in there which we'll be presenting to internal working groups to consider and develop as appropriate in a meeting early next month. I think the final thing to say about this report is that it should enable us to undergo a just transition where the burden of responsibility for tackling this falls proportionately on those who are best able to bear it. And obviously, of course, we recognise that Blackpool's particular position as the most deprived local authority area in the country means that we're going to be calling on extra resources to do that, looking towards other areas to provide their fair share of the work on this area. So I'm happy to take any further questions on the report.
Thanks, Scott. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Councillor Hobson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As the portfolio holder for climate change until the spring, I'd just like to congratulate Jane, Scott and Anthony and all the other officers involved in both the council and the council-owned companies in an absolutely fantastic action plan. I think you should be very proud of yourselves of that. It really is going to sort of set the town up on a great footing going forward, so well done all involved on that.
Right. And Councillor Hugo.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to echo that sentiment and thank Councillor Hobson and the team for getting us to the stage we're at now. And just that I'm really keen to get on to the next stage of implementation. I think it's exciting times. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Scott, and thank you for the hard work done by Councillor Hugo and previously Councillor Hobson prior to that. All I want to say is that it's not just the council doing this, it's actually be part of the whole town, and every resident of the town needs to take on board the issues that face us going forwards. It's not just us, it's for the children of our future, like my daughter. So it's just for everybody to be aware of what they need to do there, every little bit they can do to help us achieve our objective here. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you. Am I moving the recommendations, Jane? Or So if I can move the recommendations at number 1 and 2 in the agenda. Is everyone? So, somebody second it? Okay. Yeah, and then can I have a show of hands, please?
And that's agreed.
Thank you very much. Agenda item for medium-term financial sustainability strategy. So that's over to you, Steve. I don't know if you wanted to start by commenting about leaning off from Anthony's comments with regards to the outcome of the peer review.
Thank you. This is the refresh strategy, and it was always the intention to bring it about now. The last strategy covered another 6-year period up to 21-22, the current year. And during that 6-year period, we had a very welcome 4-year settlement at the outset, which enabled some robust financial planning to take place. But that was then followed by 2 successive 1-year settlements, one as a result of EU exit and second as a result of COVID, which didn't lend itself to medium-term financial planning. So as I say, now was always the time to actually refresh that in the context of the latest spending review, which was announced last week by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, on the 27th of October. And this particular strategy, it provides a financial framework for medium-term planning. It provides that direction of travel and indicates how the Council can demonstrate sustainability over that period. There are some key budget assumptions within this, and there's some overarching guiding principles and some 7 savings work streams that support that sustainability. It sets the scene and context for the next current year plus 5, outlining the current system demands and pressures, the key ones that are no surprises that feature every month in the financial monitoring, and namely children's social care, growth and prosperity agenda, and adult social care. So no surprises there. But it does provide a top-level summary of the Chancellor's spending review of the 27th of October. And it was very much a top-level announcement. And from that, we've been able to tease out some sort of pro-rata indications of what that might mean for Blackpool. But we literally only had 2.5 days between that announcement and finalisation of this report. We are promised that the provisional local government finance settlement will be announced in early December, but this strategy enables us to really get that process starting, particularly for next year's budget in 22-23. And there are 8 recommendations within this report that's seeking executive's approval. There are purposely more narrative within the strategy than actual numbers. There is a table further on which gives some indicative budget gaps for the next 6 years, which total 58 million. That includes the current year's 20 million. So looking at 38 over the remaining 5 years. And supporting that table is one of the appendices, Appendix 1, a more detailed medium-term financial plan. I can assure you behind that, something like this 18-page, even more detailed spreadsheet supporting that. And that will be very much an organic document that will change literally day by day, week by week over that 6-year period. And it is the intention that should there be any significant changes, we will bring this strategy and a revised medium-term financial plan back to executive. But so long as the strategy themes stand true, We will perhaps update the medium-term financial plan as part of our budget monitoring or annual budget process. Happy to answer any questions or clarify any points.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, sorry, Chair, I do have a
Yes,
question,
please.
but I'm going to add my questions in later on at item 8, which probably overlaps some of these questions here. Okay.
So you want to leave those questions to
Later
item
on,
8?
yeah.
Okay. So if I, thanks, Steve. If I can move then the move the resolutions at, I've lost my page numbering now. I think it's from 1 to 7
What?
in the agenda. A second there. Yep. And a show of hands, please. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that's the 8 recommendations approved, okay?
Thank you. And then we're on to agenda item 5, which is the Arts and Culture Scrutiny Review Panel. And I believe we're joined by Councillor Walsh, Vice Chair of the Review Panel, to present the item. Councillor Walsh, are you there? Oh, yes, I can see you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and good evening to members of the Executive, Council officers and the public. As part of 2021 Tourism, Economy and Communities Work Plan, the members identified the need to look at the wider subject of arts and culture within the resort. I think it's widely accepted that maintaining and supporting the arts and culture across the town is important to the town's economic prosperity and heritage. This is especially true given the negative impact of COVID-19, which has been felt across all sectors, but none maybe more so than the culture and arts sector. Can I also take the opportunity to thank the council officers in compiling the report and those organisations who undertook a mapping of the arts, that being Antisocial and Abingdon Street Studios, as outlined in section 6.10. In support of the recommendations to establish a new Blackpool and cultural partnership within the key task of producing a Blackpool cultural plan, can I highlight a couple of key points from the report? Through the Blackpool High Street Heritage Action Zone programme, cultural mapping research had been undertaken in March 2021. Just under 100 creatives completed the survey. The Heritage Action Survey of local Fylde Coast artists and cultural organisations recorded that 71% had not made funding applications, and this was determined through the lack of awareness. And this ranged from professional artists to hobbyists. This is disappointing given that the Cultural Recovery Fund had been set up to support this sector. I believe a third round of grants has now been completed. Another aspect of the report, only this time on a more positive note, is that the Arts Council England has recently announced that Blackpool will be one of 15 priority places in the north where the ACE want to deliver new opportunities for investment. As an agreement with Mr. Peter Legg, Head of Economic and Cultural Services, and Ms. Caroline Primmett, Head of Arts, and the members of the Arts and Cultural Scrutiny Review Panel, there has never been a better time to have a cultural partnership and a cultural plan to make the most of these new opportunities going forward. Indeed, creating a more joined up approach with the arts and cultural sector will allow partners to understand what is needed for a full and concise recovery. This includes hours of work, viability of business, alternative working, cultural cohesion, mental health. I think we can all agree that other partnerships such as housing and the food partnership has been successful. Finally, Chair, a partnership and cultural plan would help bring together the arts and cultural organisations and professionals here in Blackpool. It would also act as a unified voice and an influential authority on both regional and national levels. With that, Chair, can I submit the report to the Executive and its recommendations? Thank you.
Thank you. And could you pass on our thanks to the remainder of the Scrutiny Review Panel for their hard work through this. I mean, it is particularly important, and I know to a number of particular significance and pointedness, really, when we have such fantastic heritage and arts in Blackpool, and I think it's absolutely of such importance, from the beautiful buildings we have, the Winter Gardens, to the little gem of the our gallery. You know, it's just incredibly important, I think. So, and to bring it all together. And thank you very much for that detailed summary, Councillor Walsh, and for all the work that's been done on it. Does anybody have any comments, questions? Councillor Benson?
Sorry, Councillor Benson, can you use your mic?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank the committee. Culture and art are not something that we particularly... Thank you, Chair. I do apologise. Yeah, culture and art are not something that we usually associate with Blackpool, but with a wealth of talent, both amateur and professional, which we should be extremely proud of. Our heritage and our buildings, you know, are absolutely brilliant. And it's not something that we actually go around looking at, but, you know, that is something we should be very proud of. I'd like to thank the committee and the officers for their excellent review. It explains in great detail the key challenges that the cultural sector have been facing since COVID-19 and our national pandemic. I fully endorse the recommendations of the scrutiny and of setting up of a cultural partnership and a cultural plan, and this will hopefully aid the cultural sector's recovery in our future development, and I look forward to working with the sector in the near future. So recommend that to the committee.
Thank you, Councillor Benson. So if we can move the resolution that on the information gathered from the cultural sector in Blackpool and discussions with key national partners such as the Arts Council and the Scrutiny Review Panel recommendation to agree that a new Blackpool cultural partnership with a key task of producing a Blackpool cultural plan be established. Have a seconder? And a show of hands, please.
And that's agreed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Walsh. So, agenda item 6, Shareholder Advisory Committee Terms of Reference, and I believe that's Mr. Towers.
Thank you, Chair. The Executive may remember that obviously it set its shareholder committee up back in June 2021, early this year, as a result of a review, I think, initiated yourself by appointing Councillor Taylor as the lead executive shareholder representative, and therefore reviewed the shareholder advisory board as it was at that time and formed this direct committee of the executive. It did agree a set of terms of reference at that point, but also asked the committee to review them at a future meeting. Coincidental with that, in September there was some national guidance issued by an organisation called Local Partnerships, which came about as a result of a review undertaken following Nottingham City Council's governance arrangements report from the government's lead inspector, Max Collar, and that guidance has been very instrumental in updating the terms of reference. So the updated version is attached to this report. I'm pleased to say that a lot of the recommendations in the guidance were already covered within the remit of the committee. A couple that have been added in, which I'll just highlight for information. So there's a particular responsibility to review from periodically the reason, the original purpose behind each company and why it was set up, and whether those intended outcomes are still relevant. There's also a clear responsibility around providing a holistic review of risk to the council offered by the companies and pulling that together. And again, there's a further one regarding approving each of the strategic business plans of each of the companies. So not necessarily things that weren't happening, but they're clearly documented and referenced within the terms of reference. So this was considered by the shareholder committee itself on the 8th of October and are recommending back to the executive for approval. So I'm not sure if Councillor Taylor wishes to add to that as chair of the committee chair.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, this has been generally welcomed by the companies and others in the council as a way of exercising a stronger influence and clearer responsibility of the council for its companies. This is becoming more and more a feature of UK local government, where important services are handled by companies, but that brings a high degree of risk. And we've seen over recent times a number of authorities where they've got into pretty big trouble with companies they've set up. And although these are theoretically independent, in a sense, companies under the Companies Act, in reality, it's the shareholder, which is the authority, who picks up the bill. So it's important that we give our companies the necessary independence to use their expertise to get on with it, but at the same time, we keep a good look at what they're doing, we monitor what they're doing, and it forms a way also of expressing to them what the council's wishes are, what they would like to see happen. So it's a good step forward, which I'm happy to see implemented, and I'm happy to propose it.
Thank you. So if we can move the resolution, which is to agree the amended powers and duties of the Shareholder Committee as set out in Appendix 6A to the report. Have a second that? Yep. And a show of hands, please.
And that's agreed.
Thank you. And then item 7, Treasury Management Half-Yearly Progress Report up to the 30th of September. So that's over to you again, Steve.
This is a standard report that we bring to Executive every 6 months. It looks at all manner of Treasury management dealings and transactions, i.e. banking, borrowing, lending, investment, which we do very little of, and overall cash flow management. I think the key figures within this report are the fact over the last 6 months net borrowing has actually reduced by £3 million, because we have had quite some significant sums of cash through COVID grants that have allowed that, and that at table 4 we're showing an improvement of 1.2 million from lower financing costs, i.e. the use of temporary borrowing instead of locking in. So that is a significant contribution to the overall general fund balances. There's been a lot in the news recently about the base rate. During this 6-month period, the base rate was at 0.1%. The Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee met last week and voted 7-2 to maintain that base rate. There is an expectation that will go up over the next 2 years. However, the Treasury Management Panel of Council Officers believes that fixed long-term rates have already factored in this increase. So whilst we still have some considerable headroom between temporary borrowing rates and what we have in the budget, we will continue this strategy, but we will monitor it on a very regular basis. And in fact, our Treasury Management Panel meets this coming Friday.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone, any comments or questions? Councillor Smith, or your questions at the
I got one more. Just Steve just answered my question in the comment. I did write a question down here regarding that, and that was regarding the interest rate forecast to go up. And Steve's answered the question by the ways monitoring going forwards to get the best finance available for the council. But thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. So if I can move the resolution is to note the report concerning the Treasury Management activities for the 6 months to 30th of September. Are you all happy with that? Show of hands, please.
And that's agreed.
Thank you. And then agenda item 8, financial performance monitoring as at month 5. Back again to you, Steve.
Month 5, we're showing an overall overspend of some 6.5 million, which is what it was roughly at month 3. Of that 6.5 million, some 3.9 million relates to unfunded COVID-related consequences. So a significant sum on top of what we incurred last year. Hence, the non-COVID related pressures amount to 2.6 million, and it's well documented where those pressures sit. We've applied all the COVID funding as at month 5, though at month 6 we did submit the actual for the sales fees and charges return, which showed an improved position by some £200,000. In relation to our wholly owned companies, which was a previous item, we started the year forecasting a cumulative deficit across the companies of 5.6 million. That has dropped to 2.3 million at month 5 and looks to be improving month on month. So that's a very encouraging position. And in relation to income collection, which we keep a very close eye on, particularly post-COVID, we see little change in the council tax rate year on year. The council tax reduction scheme has worsened by about 5% year on year, but of course we haven't got the £150 top up to apply to recipients of council tax reduction scheme. And business rates, on the face of it, is showing an 8% worse position, but that's not comparable because of the different terms to business rate reliefs year on year. But we are hopeful that the issuing of reminders, final notices and summonses in September will start to yield some improvements in collection rate, particularly on business rates.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Can I just ask, I think in relation to the COVID costs that, of this year, other local authorities, I would presume some local authorities will be in similar position to ourselves with that unmet COVID spend. Has there been kind of sort of, discussion in terms of sort of putting that position, to government in terms of, because obviously all grant funding, it just ceased in July, was it June, July? And particularly leisure services, I think, have been impacted, haven't they, for the balance of this year?
That's right. The last tranche of mainstream grant was to the end of June, and of course the relaxation of lockdown continued into July. It's a very common phenomenon, particularly across the upper tier authorities. We did ask the finance director at the Department for Levelling Up if there was any likelihood of any future COVID funding, and he said it was extremely unlikely. But when you think we've got 3.9 million of pressures this year on top of 3.2 last year, 7.1 million over the 2 years.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Feels I need to speak to the team monitor there, but I actually speak to yourself over there, so I guess it should be throw me a little bit. So I want to say a big thank you to Steve and the team for the report, for Member 5 monitoring report. It's been a challenging for the council in post-COVID and during COVID, and currently to achieve that. And it's been difficult over the last 11 years. I've got a couple of questions. Shall I just do all the questions in one go, Chair? Then Steve can respond to them individually. First question is, would I be correct, as the report says, that the revenue support grant has reduced since 2011 to 2021 by 186 million? So would I be correct in saying that the compound effect of that coming forward next year, with the budget cuts looking forward, would be about £1.4 billion? I just want to check my maths on that one. Also, another concerning thing is, I know it's good to have, well, it's not good, it's good to have more money going to the NHS and services, but the impact on the government's introduction of the extra 1.25% employees NI is going to affect the council budget going forward next year. So how is that going to affect the council on our part share of the employers NI at 1.25%? Also, just one understanding, because I know we talk about figures all the time, it might be easier for the public to understand as well. We have 1% of council tax. How much does 1% of council tax actually generate as a whole? So we always talk about percentages, so it'd be nice to know what 1% is of council tax. And also, the other question I have, final question to Steve, is with the increased inflation since lockdown and COVID, and on the media and TV, what's the impact on the council budget currently, and what the impact on going forward on the council budget 22-23 and ongoing? Thank you, Steve.
Okay, I'll answer those in the order you asked them, Councillor Smith. The first one around the compound effect of, it's the budget gap, which comprises reductions in revenue support grant, but also demands and pressures on services and pay awards and non-pay inflation. It's just short of 1.4 billion, so yeah, very, very close, 1.38 billion pounds there. In relation to the increase to employers' national insurance next year, within the appendix to the medium-term financial strategy, there's that detailed spreadsheet. There is a line, a very small font there, which shows a figure of £800,000, and that's the impact on council officers' national insurance uplift. There is, of course, the pressure on commission services, particularly adult social care, adult residential care provision and domiciliary care. And we're still working out what that figure could well be, and if in fact we will get reimbursed from the government in the December settlement. In relation to council tax, well, 1% is roughly £600,000. And lastly, the effects of inflation. Well, across the board, it's extremely varied. It is impacting on energy and utilities in the current year. The next financial year, we've made a broad assumption, the cost price index increase of 3.7%, but we will be disentangling every element of non-pay to try and understand what inflationary pressures they are incurring, if any. There are some that will be incurring contractual commitments based on particular indices. There'll be others like energy and utilities, which can be quite volatile, and it might also depend upon our procurement route as well, be that spot buying or contract purchasing. So there's a significant piece of work to be done on non-pay inflation and working on an envelope of 3.7%.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Anybody for anything else? No? Okay, thank you. So if I can move resolutions of 1, 2, 3 and 4 in the agenda. Show of hands, please.
And that's agreed.
Thank you. Thanks again, Steve, and everybody attending virtually. That's the end of the meeting this evening. Thanks for your attendance.